Alright guys, welcome back to the multiplayer section of this video series. And in this video we'll be using a practical approach to everything I explained in the previous video in the sort of a theoretical section. Now we'll be using this graph here for a reference. Well, not a reference, but just to illustrate something that's happening behind the scenes. If something is unclear, I'll try to visualize it a little bit better using this graph. Now, throughout this video, I recommend you open the network compendium, and here you will find, of course, the aforementioned the table here that actually shows you what kind of things in RPCs are run. For now, of course, this might seem a little bit dubious, but don't you worry. By the end of this video, you'll have a crystal clear understanding of how multiplayer works. You should also probably either remember this by mind, like have this in your head, or just at least remember the page, which is 60. Now, that being said, let's go ahead and dive in immediately. You'll notice that this is a testing project because it's a good idea. I wanted to just showcase to you how different things worked. I didn't want to work on the main game out of the box. I recommend you do the same thing. You always create your own testing project, and you just run a bunch of things. Now I use the third-person template here because it has a character. We're not going to be using this map here. I mean, on your own testing environment, you can of course freely utilize this, but I will sidestep this whole map here in a couple of minutes because I do want to show you different examples and maybe some things that might be unclear. Now, the reason for that, of course, is since the character class has been created by Epic for ease to easily actually operate and create a really quick prototype, etc. It has quite a lot of functionality, replication being one of them. Now, if I go ahead and play this, you of course will see me being able to go ahead and just jump around and do whatever it is I do in a single player mode. So how do we enable multiplayer? Well, quite simply, you just click this drop down here, and here in the multiplayer options you have a number of players, 64 being currently the maximum. My guess is by the time you're watching this, this is much higher. I don't know if it's possible to set it to 100. Yeah, I think you can actually set this to 100 as well. So there actually really isn't a maximum. And the number of players we're going to be 2, and we'll be using a listen server for now. If you don't click this box here, you don't flip this bit, it's not gonna be running on a dedicated server, and I'll show you the reason why. So if I play this right now, you'll see that I have 2 games, and I can move and I can see the other player and my position, the character's animation, and everything else is going to be perfectly replicated across the network, onto the client. Of course, this is currently the server. I'm running on the server, and this is the client, and the client can move just as well. So so far so good. An important thing to note here is that right now there's actually there are currently four characters altogether in the entire game, right? So if you remember correctly, I told you that the server has a copy of everything the client has. So in this case, we have 2 clients. Both of these clients have a player controller each, and they also have, and they also have a character each. Okay, so not only that, but they also have a copy of the character of the other person's character on their computer. So what do you think? What does the server have? Well, it has 2 player controllers, and it has 2 characters right now. That is, of course, because the client itself is living on the server. Okay, well, that's very simple and all that. So you understand, I hope you understand this bit where these things live sort of together. I'm going to delete these for now, like so. We can continue. I'm going to stop the game, and I'm going to run this on a dedicated server. Now, if I play this at this point, you'll see that these guys are spawned inside each other because there isn't really a spawn point that created for them to spawn. But if I take a look on the left side, on the right side, you'll see that there is another pawn here. Sorry, another character here. And this character is actually right now not owned by the server. It is unowned, but it exists in the world. Therefore, it can be possessed by either a player or an AI controller, meaning that if this gets possessed by an AI controller, it means that the server will own it, and anything that you run will be, in accordance to this table here. If something is run on the server on a server-owned actor and it's replicating on the client, it will actually run on the server. If you try to do something like that, it's not going to happen. But generally speaking, as you can imagine, because there is actually copies of the server on both of these, there's like a parallel thing going on. Even though right now my client 1, is owning this character, the same thing is happening on the server. But because the server doesn't have a client, it's actually owned by the server. So if you can imagine that behind the game there is another game that is being completely identical, and you're actually watching that game, so that's the way to think about it, then you can imagine what's going on the server. If you can't, generally speaking, it's better to run this on a listen server so you can see what the server sees, because the server doesn't have a viewport. If it's a dedicated one, it doesn't need it. It doesn't need it because there's no players on it to utilize its resources. But generally speaking, you don't want to be setting up logic for a listen server for one reason. I'll show you why. Be aware that running anything, if your game runs properly on a dedicated server, it will have no problems running on a listen server without the pitfalls of listen servers, because they do allow for some, to some degree, a set of, it allows some cheating by the client, and you should always assume that the client will cheat. So that's why you would want to, you'd want to actually limit that ability as much as possible. And just because the dedicated server's version runs fine on a listen server doesn't mean that the version of a listen server will run fine on a dedicated server. That's why you should almost always create your logic in such a way that it runs on a dedicated server, because in the future, if you decide to opt out of that option, you can just release it with a listen server. But if you already release something with listen server, it's not going to be very well. It's not going to be working out of the box for you if you decide to run dedicated. Anyway, let's go ahead and open the character to show you why this is actually working. And I'm going to open the blueprint editor and just going to go through some of the some of the replication options here. Again, I'm not going to go too much in depth when it comes to relevancy. I recommend you download Epic's example project here, which showcases quite well, might I add, that the way relevancy works. But in the general gist of it, the gist of it is that if something is far away enough from a character, it doesn't need to be updated all the time. I've already talked about this in the previous video. Not in depth again, but I hope you get the idea. You get a visual example of it in Epic's example projects, but I'm not going to go ahead and set this up just so you can see a couple of tip boxes, a couple of checkboxes affecting gameplay in a particular manner. Replicate movement and replicate are one of the two important ones. If anything, if your actor does not replicate, nothing inside that guy will actually replicate as well. So because this is generally a very well created character, in other words, everything that you need in order to replicate, including movement and regular replication, as well as replicating different variables, etc., is already done for you. So you don't have to concern yourself. Now here at the bottom, as you can see, replicated movement has different modes of replication. That's of course reserved for the character class only. It doesn't exist for pawn or any other actors. And netload on client. Actually, I'm not sure what this does. Okay, well, I suppose it should be on. I don't know. But you've got the net dormancy here, and that's interesting because this whole section here is for network optimization. And the dormancy essentially tells you how often something is going to sleep. So it's kind of like sleeping the simulated body of the physics on a particular object. It's the same thing. And you can go from never sleeping to actually sleeping as much as possible. So, depending on the object that this is running on, you might have different effects or different desires. The net code distance squared is how far this object has to be from other objects before it becomes completely useless. Okay? So this is the relevancy distance. Now this is fairly high relevance distance, but I'm not sure. I think it's in centimeters, so you might want to add a couple of zeros for your particular example if you want to use it. Next you've got the net update frequency, which is 100 right now, and then the minimum update frequency that is required for the game to run. You have to understand that unlike regular processes such as the update tick or the begin play or some kind of timer or timeline, etc., these things run very stable when it comes to local machines. But the network itself is fairly volatile because you don't know what kind of connection the connecting client will have, meaning that this could drop drastically as packets are lost, or when somebody's grandma starts downloading movies, for example, and you're going to run into problems whenever players have different connection speeds. So you need to have a preferred net update frequency and a minimum update frequency. And then you have the net priority, which right now is 3, and this is basically a ratio. Now, if memory serves me well, the regular actor's net priority is 1. So like if you have something like a tree or a box or a barrel or whatever, that thing's network priority is 1. The matinee, or in other words, the actual video section, like cinematic section, you could say, of Unreal is, I think it was 2.5, maybe it's 2.7 or 2.5. You have to check on the documentation, but it doesn't matter because chances are you're not making cinematics. And then you've got the net priority for characters and pawns. Generally, it's 3 because you need a fairly high number for that. Of course, you can't. If you set everything for 3, this is going to be a completely useless node because it can't just magically make the bandwidth better. It can just prioritize several things based on their weight, right? So you can think of this as layers, right? Not as layers, but floors. The topmost floor will get the first update, and then as we go further and further down, they're not going to get as frequent an update if the network starts to suffer. Because this is a character class and presumably will be controlled by a player, you do want to have a fairly high priority on it so that that you can actually jump and move if you want to. With that being said, don't try to abuse this system too much. I mean, Unreal's Epic's implementation of networking is very well done. Generally speaking, you're not going to run into too many troubles or problems. But this is your optimization graph. This is where you can optimize a bunch of things. So depending on your game's performance, you might want to drop the net update frequency or reduce priority or increase priority. Again, it depends on what you're running. With that being said, you can also replicate components. I just don't know where it is. There we go, component replication. So you can replicate components, and that's something that you should be rarely doing. You'll notice that even though this third-person character class is replicated, none of these components actually are. Obviously, Arrow does not get inherited because it doesn't even get drawn. But the mesh, for example, the camera boom, all these things, they can get replicated. And despite having replication, Boolean here, even if it's not ticked, you're still going to get all the functionality that you want, such as pressing W, etc. Generally speaking, you shouldn't be replicating components because it can become very heavy on the bandwidth. You can create serious bottlenecks if you do that. Okay, so that's it when it comes to the replication tab here. I don't want to be using this particular map here, so I've created my own. It's called MP Test, and it's got a bunch of got 5 actors here. I'm going to load the map. And immediately, of course, you'll see that the map is a very simple level. It only has a directional light and a subject onto which we're going to be experimenting. So first of all, I've set up a game instance, something that we may actually have to overlook. I mean, I was thinking of maybe doing something about it, but we'll see. At the end of the video, I might go ahead and do something with it, but I'm not sure. I don't think there's anything that cannot be explained by the other ones. This was kind of like the first thing I created. Then we have the game mode, which has a game session here, you'll note, except, I mean, it has a print me function, but it also has a game session class. And this class, we'll talk about this whenever we start integrating this into Steam. And, this basically holds logins, related things. Session, right? The session is what you create. Whenever you create a lobby, etc., whenever your players just sit there. It's not necessary. You don't have to actually use it, but it's nice to know about it. You'll notice that there isn't, of course, a game session here. A game instance here. If I wanted to use a game instance, I'd have to go ahead into my project settings, and in the maps and modes, because game mode gets destroyed whenever you transition from a map, but game instance persists. You want to be using the game instance that you've set up. So that's how you would set this up. And yeah, there really isn't much else. You be aware, please, that the game mode has a lot of interesting functions as well as the game instance. I mean, game instance has very few, such as 4, like whenever you initialize, shut down, or travel, get some errors. But the game mode has quite a lot more. As you can see, there are 35 of them, and they've got some pretty interesting things, such as on post login, on logout, like interesting things that you might be using. For example, whenever a player logs out, you want to save their inventory and maybe put it somewhere else or whatever. You got a lot. Okay. Any damage is weird to have, even though this is a game mode. It shouldn't be getting any damage. How are you going to damage a game mode? But some of them are kind of useless. Then of course you have the. I'm going to close these now. Then of course you have the player controller. We're going further down the hierarchy here. You have the player controller where I've set up some interesting things where we'll be, whenever I press the button, I'll be running a different thing. So each of these, of course, have their own value, and the PC variable here is going to be 0. All of them are 0 by default. Whenever I press 1, I will print this value. Whenever I press 2, I'll print the pawn value, which of course is this one. It has its own value set, and of course a function that prints it. It also replicates by default, and it moves movement replication is also in. I'm not sure if this will work, by the way, because I kind of inherited from the default pawn, and the default pawn I think it inherits from the spectator pawn, or vice versa. But as far as I'm aware, spectators you don't need to see spectators' position, so maybe it might not work. I'm not sure if it'll work properly. In fact, if I go ahead and say it's always relevant, I think the relevancy setting for it like that. Maybe it will update by default. Okay, so that's the pawn here done, and the player controller also has access to the game mode, and you'll see that I have a print string here saying that there is no game mode, and the more astute among you will remember that I said that the game mode only exists on the server, and you'll see why. And then of course you have the actual victim here, which we're not going to be interested just yet, but essentially it has a function that like an event, which allows it to change the color to a random color, and then I set it to a to the parameter value of the material that I've set. I'm using the laser pointer instance material, so this is available in the engine content, so enable engine content, and you can use this yourself. It's a really neat material. You can also open it up to see how it behaves. It needs a little bit of cleanup. There's some empty nodes here and there. I think it was done a little bit hastily, but you can definitely extend it and modify it on your own if you really so desire. With that being said, this pretty much covers everything that we need. This is also replicated, as you can, actually it doesn't replicate. I need to replicate this guy. Forgot to replicate. I'm also going to set him to be always relevant. That's also important. I mean, just for this example, you shouldn't be having everything to be always relevant, because, like I said, if you move too far away from it, it needs to be disappeared, so to speak. Now I'm going to compile and close this guy, and we'll basically run this now and see what happens. I'm currently running on a listen server, so if I play, you'll see that my server sees the pawn, and the pawn sees the server, but the movement is not replicated. That's very unfortunate. I'm not sure why this isn't working. I mean, it's not something that will be a problem for this video, but I really don't know why it's not replicating properly. Maybe I didn't really need to replicate that. It should replicate the movement. Maybe there's something broken in it. I don't know. No matter, that's not something that we're currently interested in. We're more interested in the ways variables reflect, etc. So as you can see, I have a pawn value here, and let's say I want to do something with it. So I'm going to play again, and I'm on the server. If I press 1, you'll see that I get my player controller. Press 2, I get both pawns because my pawns are set on a loop here. And if I go ahead and press 3, it'll give me the game mode on the server, but of course it won't give me a game mode on the client because the client doesn't have a game mode. If I press 4, it's going to change the color on the server, but because there's no actual replication or anything, it's not going to change color on the client until I press 4 on the client. So that's fairly easy to understand, and that's where we're going to actually swap from the server onto a dedicated server for one simple reason. And I hope you understand this reason is that right now the the first client, the first player has a lot of authority and has the potential of creating quite a lot of cheats in order to bypass many of these functions, and that's not what you want. So how would an easy way to think about this is to imagine that there is something behind, there is another copy of this behind it. Okay, just imagine for a second that this is the front end of a double layered construct, and behind it there is the exact same event graph with the exact same functions. In the interest, of course, of saving time and not having to program them separately, you just have access to one. So the next question you might ask is, well, how the hell do I know, how the hell do I know where it actually runs? Very simple. You can run this using a has authority switch. Has authority. And this switch is very simple. If you go into the macro, double click it, you'll see that it has authority and a branch. What this does is it basically checks where is this object currently living in and if it's being fired there. An easy way to understand this is to basically visualize this in a very simple manner. And that is, of course, by using the authority here. So let's go on to the, I don't know where, the pawn. No, what are we going to do? We're going to print the pawn here. We're going to print the pawn. So what I'm going to do here is essentially insert this has authority onto my second event. Has authority. Come on. Has authority, and it will only fire whenever the thing that exists on the server will be fired. And then whenever it doesn't, here on the remote, I'm going to print a string. I'm going to say silence slave. So because this will only happen on the server, whenever we try to fire this off on the client, it's going to say go fuck yourself, basically. So here on the server, I press 1, it says player controller. 2, I get the pawn. 3, I get the game mode. Everything is fun. Oh, oops, my bad. And here I have press 1, I get the player controller. Press 2, I get a very annoying message. 3, there is no game mode. So I got nothing, no game mode, nothing. And that's very unfortunate. And the easiest way to see this really is if I go ahead and debug this guy on the client, you'll see that on the client, whenever I press 2, actually I need to set the object. Whenever I press 2, it fires off and it goes to the remote because, well, I don't have authority. This is a client. If I go to the server and I select notice that it has a copy of the player controller, and I go to the first player controller, which as far as the server is concerned is itself. And if I press 2, as you can see, it executes flawlessly and runs on the authority. That still doesn't solve our problem though. How the hell are we going to separate the listen server and the the listen server from the listen host? Because right now I am a player, right? I can move around and I have complete and total control of the things that are happening inside. And this is the server side that we're currently modifying. So that's not something that we want. Well, that's where RPCs come in. And in order to properly demonstrate those, I'm going to go ahead and switch this to a dedicated server. And now we're going to run this as a dedicated server. If I go ahead and play, if I press 2, you'll see that I get silence slave on both of these guys. And this means that now I don't actually have any way to execute this graph because I don't have a hook into the server, right? And you might think, well, that's not a problem. Just execute it the way it is, and we'll be able to play just fine. Very well. Let's go ahead and do this. And in order to show you what I mean, I'm going to go ahead and increment something. For example, this PC variable, which is the player controller variable. I'm going to go ahead and increment this by pressing Z, so Z key. And I'm just simply going to grab this guy and increment him, like so. Wonder if I can. Yeah, I can. Right, I should have done this instead of hooking twice. Anyway, so I got Z, which is going to increment this variable, and let's see what it's going to do. Right now, again, I'm running on a dedicated server at this point. Very well, so Z, I'm going to print, there we go, it says 3 anytime I press Z. If I press 1 here, though, the second player controller is 0. Press 5, that's great. Now, generally speaking, you do not want to be modifying, you don't want to be modifying player controller variables from another player controller because remember, everything goes through the server. Now, if I want to like share this information with others. Let's say I want to replicate this. All right, let's say I want to replicate this because let me just tell you this. Let me just show you something. So I will go ahead, I'm going to delete this print string. I'll go ahead and create a delay node, and on begin play, which is P, on begin play, I will delay for 10 seconds. 10 seconds, and I will run this. Now, because begin play executes everywhere, including the server, this will be ran, right? And we'll also receive the server version of this variable after 10 seconds. So what I'm going to do is play, press 1. So I'm going to press Z a couple of times, and then I'm going to press Z a couple of times here, and we're going to wait for the server version to pop up. Let's see. There we go. So as you can see, you got player. Well, come on. I pressed it 8 times on both of them. Okay, that's lame. Let me just do it one more time. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, great. Let's see what kind of result we get. As you can see, the server's player controller is actually 0. And of course, it gets executed one more time on the others. So even though I'm currently setting these things, the server doesn't really care about it. And that's a problem. So how do we, maybe you could think that, all right, well, we're just going to run a has authority. But remember, has authority will never actually run. In other words, it will never actually, I shouldn't have deleted this, by the way. It will never actually fire off the authority unless we're on the server. Again, imagine there's 2 versions of this graph, one behind and one in front. We need to get to the one behind. But that's not a main issue right now, right? We want to set this variable. Well, let's go ahead and replicate it. Now, the replication, of course, has its own conditions here. As you can see, there's quite a lot of them. And Cedric has explained quite a few of them in the network compendium. A lot of them are explained in the documentation, but some of them are kind of empty. Now, I'm not going to go over them, but they have fairly simple explanation. They have to do with roles as well. I recommend you do read the documentation when it comes to roles and these conditions, because they are important for optimization. But you could always figure them out on your own. Things like simulated or physics, maybe just the physics. Maybe you don't want to update for the owner, etc., etc. You also want to do the custom. If you want to do the custom bit, you actually need to overwrite a function. An event. I forget its name, what it's called, something condition, something. You could find this out on the net just quite easily. Anyway, if you decide to go for rep notify, this will create a function here, and whenever your value or whatever it is you're replicating, whenever this variable actually gets changed, then this thing will fire. It's not going to change on update. It's not going to fire on update. It's going to change. It's going to fire on change. Okay, let me reiterate this. This firing pin will not execute unless there is a change in the value of the variable. It will not execute every update, which means that even though you'll be updating 100 times over the network, as long as this is the same, let's say this is the health and it gets, it stays the same throughout like 10 seconds, over 10 seconds, this will not get fired as many times as there are updates. So consider this. Anyway, once you delete this, this will turn into a regular replication here, and we can commence with what we're about to do. So this is a replicated variable, and if you think about it, yeah, that's great. That means it gets replicated across the network to the thing behind the screen, to the thing behind the monitor, which is the server. And if I play, I'll press 1, as you can see, great. I'm going to press Z a couple of times here, press Z a couple 100 times here. This is 8, and this is also 5, okay? So let's see what the server is going to say. Well, the server is still 0, as you can see at the bottom. The server is 0. What's going on? Let's see why this isn't happening. I'm currently on a, let's say, client 1. As you can see, it says client here. So this is the front end of this graph, right? Anything that is here and is not on the server will be firing quite easily. So let's see. This is, I believe, client 1. Pressing Z. I need to actually select the object again. Pressing Z, and there we go. It fires quite easily, and we can print it fairly easily. So that's not an issue. Even though the variable is replicated, I cannot actually, like, the server doesn't see it as being replicated. Again, if we do this with the listen server, so you can see what I mean. So there's my listen server. I'm going to run. I'm going to do the same in the client. I press Z a couple of times. As you can see, it's updated. But as far as the server is concerned, well, this is actually the other player controller. But yeah, the server is getting its own player controller, so I would need to get another player controller, such as, you know, player controller 1, for example, to print this off. Anyway, with that being said, we need a hook into the server. How do we do that? That's where RPCs come in. RPCs are events that do not have outputs. You have to remember that. RPCs do not have outputs. However, they'll happily accept inputs. Obviously, the bigger the RPC, the more inputs you have, the heavier it's going to be to replicate over the network. But it's something that you have to live in, and, you know, to optimize it properly, that's how things operate. So maybe let's do this on the pawn here. Okay, so the pawn, again, we're running into the same problem where even if I decide to replicate this guy, I play, you know, server's fine, but I actually don't have a way to increase this, so let's do the same thing here and grab Mr. Pawn. Oops. Grab Mr. Pawn and get it over here. Instead of print me, though, I need to get an increment function here, so custom event and pawn increment. I'm going to grab this, duplicate it, and plus. No, oh, my bad. Okay, maybe I should have just plus here, because it'll give me a better one, like so. Anyway, if I compile now and play, nothing will happen because I don't have it hooked up to X. All right, there we go, X. Okay, that's great. And I'm not going to run on a dedicated, so I'm going to run on a dedicated server so we can get this done. Here, each of them are going to be increment on increment for the loop, like this. Play, and I press X. I press 2. As you can see, it's getting updated, but only on each client, even though it's replicated. That's because nothing can be set. You can't set things on the client. You need to do it on the server. So how can we do this? Well, we need to create a custom event. This one's going to be called, we need to run this on the server, and PC increment. Right, we need to run this on the server, and if you take a look here, as you can see, you have things that you have RPCs that are invoked from the server and RPCs that are invoked on the client. And the only way we can have any access to the server is through the running on a server function. That is the only hook, the only entrance, the only tunnel you can take if you want to fire something off that will be living on the server. So if I go ahead and say this will be, this will be ran on the server, notice that you have multicast and run on only client. But if I want to run this on the server, that's my only option. Okay, that's great. And obviously you can check if it's reliable or not. Reliability is something that is basically imperative, gets replicated. It will even bypass relevancy. So reliable is something that is 100% success rate. After that comes the relevancy, and of course at the lowest set you've got pretty much the outliers. So use reliable checkbox sparingly because it might bottleneck your entire bandwidth really quick. Right, so whenever I press Z, I actually want to be running this on the server in order to increment this guy. And whenever I press Z, I want to call run on server increment, and that's how I will be doing my incrementation. I could do the same, by the way, on the print as well. I could say, well, I want to print everything on the server, but I'm not going to do that because I want to see what the result will be on the actual, well, I probably should do it on the server as well. So let's just say run on server, custom event, run on server, print, and instead of pressing 1 to print, I could say I want to run on server and print the server's version of this PC variable, player controller variable. And whenever I press 1, I want to be ROS print. Come on, ROS print. There we go. I want to be printing the server version of the variable. This should be quite interesting for you now. If I play and I'm running on, let's say, client 1, and if I press Z a couple of times, and if I press 1, as you can see, it says client player controller. And that's because I'm actually saying here player controller. Oh, great. I would have to say this is a server. That's not a good idea. But let's just say that I want to do it this way then. So whenever I release it, I want to print my own thing. Okay? So something like this. So whenever I release it, I'll be printing the thing that is local to the client, and whenever I press it, I'm going to be running this from the server. Right? So let's go ahead and do the same thing. Pressing Z a couple of times, hold 1. As you can see, the client player controller is 7. If I release, my bad. If I press 1, I get the server's player controller to be 7, and then if I release it, as you can see, it's the same thing. Okay, not a problem. Excellent. That's exactly what we want. My bad. What am I doing here? That's what it is. That's what I want. Now, I forgot to set it to be running on the server. Okay, that's great. So as you can see, it's 0. There we go. It does it twice now. Great. And if I disconnect this, is it going to do it twice? No, it's not. Okay, let's do this. Let's do it like that. Sorry, if I disconnect this, it shouldn't. So it should be only server. Okay, great. All right, let's go ahead and see what's going to happen. Compile, pressing 1. As you can see, I've got both server and client. Server is 0, client is 0. Press a couple of times Z. Server is 8, client is 8. Excellent stuff. Now, that doesn't mean that, if I go ahead and remove the replication, it's going to have the opposite effect, where it's going to be set on the server, but not on the client. So if I go ahead and do the same thing, press, as you can see, server is 5, but client is 0. So that's something you need to consider. Also, if you decide to set this on the client, then the server is going to be 0. And again, you could do this for everyone, but that's why replication is there, so that you don't have to set it on the client once and then on the server once. Plus, it has quite a lot of problems if you decide to do it that way. So this is how replication works for the player controller. However, one more thing to note here. Notice that I'm currently on the client 1. If I press 1, you'll see that my server and player controller are the same. Press that a couple of times, they are like so. What's going to happen if I do this here? Well, this player controller and this server is 0, and they have their own separate values. So you have to understand what happened there. Something died. Okay, I was I actually think I had the console on. But as you can see, they have different values. Even though this is replicated, you might think that it's replicated across all clients. No, it's replicated between the client and the server. All right, that's key to a key understanding. So if I wanted to do the same, if I do the same on the pawn, which currently runs a for each loop, that's how I would do it on everyone, right? I need to have a for each loop, and even though it's replicated here, I will still need to run this each time for every pawn. So if I go ahead and run now, and I press X and press 2, you'll see that pawn 3, actually I did miss something. What did I miss? Oh yeah, this isn't actually running on the server. I need to run this on the server. So let's say this is a run on server increment, and it will be running on the server like so. And I will print the string. I think that's what I want. Several times. Yes. So if I press 2, I'll press Z, X a couple of times, you'll see that my pawn only on one side gets updated. Right? So why is that happening? Well, that's because the pawn has ownership. Each pawn has its ownership. What happened now? They're the same freaking number. Let's see again. Press X. There we go. As you can see, each pawn gets ran separately because I'm running this on the server on the incrementation here once, and the print me is actually not on the server. So I'm getting the regular value. Now, I imagine if I decide to run this several times, because I'm printing this only on one of these, I'm not actually running a print on all of them. Yeah, that's unfortunate. I'm not running a damn print on all of them. Yeah, both pawns. Client 2, client 1, client 2. As you can see, there's a significant lag between them. Yeah, so they do get the values, but they're reversed. So they're updated. That's actually what you want, right? Each of them to have their own value, because this could be player health, for example, and you want each of them to retain that value based on what it is. The reason this is happening like so is because of the ownership. Okay, they're actually owned, and because they are owned, they have separate values because the player controllers are actually assigned to them. You have to be clear about ownership because ownership is something that defines who gets what value. If these guys were not owned, but just regular, regular actors who are not possessed, that would mean that if I ran this same function again, it would actually modify all of their values. Now, in the player controller, I could say, okay, so we're running this on the server, and this gets replicated onto the clients. What if I decide to do it? I don't know, on a specific how should I say it, variable? Well, in that case, you would have to remove the replication, maybe for something like movement speed, character movement speed, and then you would have a run on client, such as this, run on owning client. See, it says run on owning client though. That's important. So I could say run on owning client. However, here's the kicker. If I want to run on owning client, I actually need to run this from the server. So if I wanted to run this on the owning client, I would have to create another custom event on client increment, which, by the way, currently this defeats the purpose because if I just wanted to run on the client, I wouldn't have bothered to go through the server. But whatever. So let's just say I'm going to be running on the client, and what am I going to run on the client? I can't actually set this globally, but because I don't need this replicated in this case, so I'm going to remove the replication, and I'm going to say, all right, well, I'm going to run this on the server, which is unnecessary. Like this whole thing right now is unnecessary. I'm just trying to give you an example, and I'm gonna. Okay, let's just do it this way. This is really pointless right now, what I'm doing, but this is something that you would use for movement speed. I'm just too lazy to create a movement speeds type deal for you and just demonstrate them parallel side by side. But you would call the run on client increment, and then you would do it like that and play. And as you can see, you've got the pawn. Press X, and pawn does not get updated because, why is that? Oh yeah, because we're setting the damn thing on the client. Kind of forgot that bit as well. Sorry guys, my bad. And actually, no, what am I doing here? I think I'm missing something along the way. Increment. Yeah, maybe that's the case. Should be incrementing it. Let's take a look at what's going on. That's why you want to see what's happening. So maybe something is running on the server. Okay, all right, okay, yeah, there we go. So that's what's going on. So if I run on the dedicated server and I take a look now on the pawn 1, and if I press X, it's gonna set it. But then if I print it, it's not gonna actually. It's gonna set it only for the server. There we go. I think that's the case here. I believe. Oh no, this isn't set to be. Oh god damn it! Sorry guys. My bad. Yeah, like whenever you're explaining this and so from different angles, it gets confusing. You just forget to toggle a bunch of things. So let's do this again. There we go. It works fine. However, this is only for the pawn. Again, see how this is only for the pawn for a first client. Second client does not recognize that fact. But because movement speed is not something that should be, well, universally changed, but only on a, only on a per character instance, that's not a problem because as far as other players are concerned, you're only updating the position of your opponent, of your characters, of your pawns. Only the position gets updated, so you don't want to be updating the movement speed. You only want to update the position. So if something is slower, for example, in this case, okay, for example, in this case, pawn, the second pawn has 19, so that's, let's say, 19% slower. This second player wouldn't exactly care what the slow rate is. He would only care how fast it's going. Okay, so as you can see, it's 0 right now for the first client, and it's 19 for the second client. And of course, first client's pawn speed is 6, whereas as far as the second client is concerned, it's 0. So exactly, it depends on what kind of thing you're trying to achieve. Probably much easier would be to just set this on the server and replicate this on the server. By the way, notice that if I set this on the server, if it's not replicated, it's not going to be reflected anywhere. So pressing X a couple of times, you'll see that there really is no effect. So that's how you would think about the way this whole thing operates, is basically by having, just obviously I'm going to go ahead and put this back to replication, is by having this in the background. Now somewhere here you might ask, okay, so this kind of defeats the purpose of switch has authority. Well, that's not entirely true, because sometimes, even though like on a dedicated server, it's mostly useless, but there are some things that are owned by the server and the player, and if you're firing something off the server, then he will always have authority, right? So understand that. The has authority switch still has a use. Generally speaking, a lot less though. Like in the, you'd mostly use it on a listen server. But again, it's the same, something that runs on a dedicated server will run just as easily on a listen server. So the final one I want to talk about here, because I kind of used most of the things that I wanted to explain. I'm not going to probably go through the game instance because this has been a fairly long video as it is. We're going to be using a bit more visual version of this, just instead of just printing things. I'm going to use the victim bit here. So let's go ahead and see what the situation is. I'm going to close the pawn, and this, of course, this bit is kind of pointless. So I'm going to say, all right, I don't want to do that. Now, another way of doing this, by the way, you could run this off the server, the whole thing, right? The reason, by the way, yeah, I should probably mention this. Another reason why this is running on a per object basis is because it runs only once on the array. If I were, here's the deal, right? If I were to disconnect this, and I were to create another custom event, and I were to call this run on server increment all, and I would run this on the server, I really wish just Ross and Rock just got them automatically tagged. But if I say I want to run this on the server, and I'm going to call this Ross increment all, then it will actually be updated to all of the pawns. It's kind of, I can't believe I forgot to mention it, but whatever. So this is my Ross incrementation. Now, because I'm running this on the server, this is not needed anymore. Okay, so I can just say, all right, this is not even replicated, because again, this is running, the execution path is already going to the server, and there really is no point in doing that. The difference, though, is that if I go ahead and play this now, and I press X a couple of times, you'll see that both pawns have the same number, because I am executing my loop. Okay, I'm executing this loop on the server. Before, I was executing the loop on the actual client, and then I was running that on the server with one of the outputs. But now I'm executing this entire thing on the server. Here's the view here, if you don't believe me. Now I'm executing this entire thing on the server, and that's an entirely different thing. Note, by the way, that on the server I'm not seeing this. However, on the client side, I'm actually going to be seeing the execution pin coming out from the X. Okay, so that's how it goes. It goes from one side and then goes to the other, and then goes and fires off the rest of them. So again, depending on what you want, you might want to be doing the loop before or after the whole scenario. So that's I kind of forgot to mention that. But again, the entire logic is split in two, right? So that's how you would do it. This would be, for example, imagine it this way. You could have this square would be your client. Just don't look at what I've marked. There we go. So this square is your client, and this square is your server. They're the exact same squares, kind of like Windows. If you want to go from one square to the other one, you need to run on server. Whatever is run on the server, let's just say you're executing over this way. There we go. We're getting my loop, blah, 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 blah. And then, actually, I should probably use the draw thing. Windows Sketch, everyone. Screen Sketch. Oh, great. I hope you can see this. So, as you can see, there's my execution line. It runs, it runs, it runs. This is my client. Client. Mouse writing, everybody. And this is my server. Come on. All right, so this is my server and this is my client. Now I'm executing along the client, and it's going to be split in half here. I'm executing along the client, and then all of a sudden I decide to, all right, now I need to split my thing, and I need to go to the server, and then the same code, even though it's the same code, I wonder if I can change the color on this thing. Yeah, I can't. So this is the execution path, but the code actually, well, this is actually pretty cool. That's not, no, sorry. That's just dumb. That's just dumb. I need to, whoa, 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 whoa. No. Okay, I want to remove this guy. Can I delete him? Can I just remove him? That's ridiculous, guys. I'm sorry. There we go. Stay away. Although it is pretty cool that you can actually, you can't even use this guy. All right. Okay. So you can. Okay. All right. That's fine. But it's a pity that I cannot remove him. Right. Sorry. This has been a little bit of an experiment. Anyway, I'm just going to use the eraser here to get rid of some of this stuff because I don't want to use it. And then I'm going to go back to my green bit. So this is my code block here. This is my first node. Then it goes to the second node. Then it goes to the third node. And the same nodes exist here. Okay, this is the same node, the same node, the same node, the same node, and the same node, and the same node. Again, the same thing here, and the same thing here, and the same thing here. Now, it's possible for me to use a has authority switch over on this point. I use a different color here. Over on this point here, and I could splinter off my execution line to be fired off on the server on the same logic, and then I could even have a different logic here for my client. Okay, so that's basically the way the whole thing operates. This was completely useless. I mean, it's a cool thing. I just got to figure out how the whole thing works. But I hope you understand how what I was trying to achieve here when it comes to explaining how the system operates. Again, this pawn. Oh, it's being run twice. Does it? Is it? Oh, that's great. This pawn here, the victim, is what we're going to be focusing next. Now, you'll notice that the victim has its own color, and again, we're not really seeing any differences. So, using the knowledge you've accumulated so far on how these things operate, what do you think should be the most appropriate method of solving our problem with essentially syncing these guys in? So, the blue and the red, and I shall turn this off because we're going to be using the blue and the red a lot. Oops. Okay, come on. Can you stop putting this in the middle? So, as you can see, I want to achieve this behavior where whenever I press a button, the colors are exactly the same everywhere. Okay, let's see how we can do this. Close the pawn, open the victim, and let's start the next chapter, so to speak. Now you might think to yourself, all right, what I can do is basically run this on the server and replicate the color. All right, let's go ahead and do that. Let's replicate the color and run this on the server. Run this on the server. So I'm going to call this Ross change. So we're running this on the server. We compile and play. And if I press 4, sorry, what am I doing? Oh yeah, 4. If I press 4, nothing is changing. Okay, let's debug and see what's going on. So I'm going to go ahead and select my subject here, and I'm pressing 4. And nothing is happening. Why is that? Actually, this should be happening. Oh yes. Is this running on the server? Yes, it is. Blah, 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 blah. I should be seeing this. Oh yeah, sorry, my bad. I'm on the server. There we go. So taking a look at the client. Taking a look at the client, I press 4. Nothing is happening on the client. I press 4 here. Nothing is happening because I'm not seeing the guy. Again. There we go. So I'm running this run on server change color, but the victim bit, if I go ahead and do this, nothing is happening. Subject. There we go. Nothing is happening. And on the server, on the dedicated server, same thing happens as well. I'm not getting the desired result. Why is that? Well, that, my friends, is because my victim, oh, it is being replicated. Oh. Okay, 1 second here. This is not what should be happening. Let's troubleshoot here real quick. Print string. I just want to see why this is not, like, if I'm receiving a color update on my guy. So 4 Yeah, it's definitely not reaching this. So let's see what's wrong here. We've got the run on server, it's being reliable. The player controller presses 4, then we got getting all actors of class. Oh, I see. We want to actually be doing this before. We want to actually be doing this before the before the loop. So we want to get all actors of class inside the thing. So what I would do now is basically create another custom event, and we're going to call this run on server. Oops, run on. Oh, come on, my run on server. I had a caps lock on, and how should I name this? Swap color. Although this isn't exactly a swapping action, but whatever. So now that I get this on the server, we shouldn't really be having a problem here. Ross swap, and this should be operating at peak efficiency now. Press 4. There we go. Server receives different colors. And this is when you can use your listen server as well, just so you can see what's going on. There we go. Listen server operates. Everything else does not. Okay, so we've achieved our desired result in terms of changing the color on at least one of the client, or at least on the server. But why isn't it changing on the clients? Isn't that something that should be taken care of whenever we, whenever we update something? You would be correct. The only problem here, of course, is that you're updating the value of a color. Okay. Now, this color value will be the same. This gets updated, believe it or not, throughout all of the clients. Okay, let's just so that I can give you an idea. Let me just do this here. Okay, let me just do this. So I'm going to go ahead and say, just copy this guy, and I will get, whenever I release 4, for example. Actually, whenever I press it, I want to do this on the client, and then here I will say get. Well, we need to get static mesh. This is a mesh, so we need to get the mesh. Get material, static mesh. Boom. Oh, this is just all materials. No, I need to get one material. Get material. No, you know what? I'm gonna get the color. My bad. Get color. That's what I want. And I'm gonna print this guy. Not begin play. Just print. And here I will print the color value of. Probably should have just copied this over from the victim, but whatever. So I'm going to get the color value here, and on play, press 4. That's the client. And here, that is also the client. And I'm not getting the same print here from this guy because I removed the print. So as you can see, the client gets updated every single time, but the color doesn't. That's because we're running this on the server. That's one of the things that you have to consider. You're running this parameter change on the server, but it has to be ran on the client. Okay? That's something that you need to consider as well. So what I could do, what we could do is we're going to be setting this on the server, but we want to run this on the owning client, right? Well, let's take a look and see. So run on client, and I'm going to say, okay, well, I want to run this on client. I'm going to say set color. Oh my God, what am I doing? Custom event, run on client, set color. And I'm going to say this is a run on client, run on owning client. Okay. And I'm going to grab the color that I've just set. I'm going to plug it in. And I will call this run on client, set color. All right. Very simple. Okay. If I go ahead and play this now and press 4, that's actually not giving me the desired result. Let's see if this gets run on the client. Yeah, there we go. It gets run on the server. So what's the story? See, the thing is, if we take a look at this graph again, if you're running something that is unowned, because it is unowned, remember, ownership is only passed through the player controller. Because this victim here doesn't actually, it's not get controlled by anything. It's not possessed by anything. It just exists. Therefore, this will be run where? Unknown actor, client, it's going to be running on the server. Okay? That's the thing. It's going to be running on the server. If you do the same on the client, it's going to be running only on the client. So how do we achieve this? We need a multicast. As you can see, it says a NED multicast. Okay. Let's go ahead and simply use this I run this on a multicast, like so. I'll delete this. Let's run this on a net multicast. Maybe this will sort out our problem. Awesome. So this would be a net multicast, right? I'm not going to rename this guy. And here, whenever I press 4, because this is running on the server, I just want to run a multicast, right? So I'm going to simply force myself into here. I'm going to disconnect this guy. All right, let's see how this is going to perform. If I play, well, that thing disappeared. Oh, why did it disappear? Because I'm not actually doing anything here. So compile and play. Oh, great, we're changing the colors, but as you can see, they're not being changed everywhere else. Why is that? Because again, as you can see, invoked from a client, owned by invoking client. Client doesn't have no right, including multicasting. Okay, so you need to run this on the server. Therefore, it's a good thing I didn't delete it, right? It's almost as if I knew this would fail. Anyway, we're going to run this guy on the server. And here we're going to run this from the server like so. And now, instead of running on server, well, this will be a multicast as well. And now, this should work, right? No, we're still getting different colors. What the hell? Why is that? That, my friend, is because we're getting a random color every single time. What really needs to happen, is for this to actually not be run anywhere, because we'll be running on the server anyway, as far as I'm aware, right? Are we running on the server? This is run on the server. This is also run on the server. We don't need 2 runs on the same thing, so no need to be replicating this guy. And here, I will actually be running this on what? On my set color, because this needs to run everywhere. Okay, this needs to run everywhere. This is going to be my multicast, because I'll be running the multicast from the server's authority, right? And just so that I can show you, even though this is not running on the server, we're firing this off from here. Change color. So this is going to be on this is going to be on the server. Therefore, this whole execution line is going to be on the server. It's going to get to here, and then I will set the color. Is this what? This is going to be multicast. So this is going to be MC set color. Multicast set color. It's going to be multicasted. And here I will say MC set color. Okay. Now, do you think this is going to work? Well, of course, it's not going to work because I don't have a color. Like this. Compile and play. Press 4. Oh, booyakasha! What do you think of that? Finally, something works. Now, I can press this as many times as I want, and it will return the same value. This is not, of course, the only way. You could have many, like a different kind of loop or something. And again, remember, this is the same object, right? So here, my loop, I mean, I'm just getting one, right? I'm not looping through everyone. But if you have many objects, maybe you want to do that. Maybe you want to use the same replication approach when we did here with the pawn whenever we're running a loop. Notice, however, that because of the ownership, because of the ownership being important here, I am running my, this is the pawn print, yeah. I'm actually running my, where's the damn thing? There we go. Because of the ownership, if I decide to run this on the server without running, like if I just press X and I run this on the server after I get the object, it will be a single thing. If I run the entire loop on the server, then I'm going to update all the values. So if it's some kind of AoE area of effect spell, you're going to run the loop. If it's a bullet, you're going to run a single, you're just going to swap this single bit here. And you can really go ham with this. Like if you decide, you can just go really nuts. Unfortunately, I haven't really found a lot of ways you could use the has authority node when it comes to a dedicated server. It's something I've always wondered, like maybe it's just useless for a dedicated server, because the only way into a dedicated server for something to have an authority would be this. I suspect maybe you could use it for a net multicast, because this is the only thing that actually runs both on a client and on a server. So let's give it a shot. Maybe that's the way it's intended to be used whenever it comes to a dedicated server. So runs on server and clients. Let's improvise something here real quick. I don't know. Let me think. Let's say I want to be running something from the server. So let's just say whenever I press C key, I want to I want to run a custom event. This is going to be run on server tester, and then I'll say I'm going to call tester, run on server tester, and then on my run on server tester, I want to, let's just say, oh, I don't know. What should I do? I'm going to need another custom event. It's going to be called MC testosterone. So maybe like this, and then I'm going to print a string. Actually, here I'm going to call this guy because I want to get the server bit. So MC testosterone, and here I'm going to say, okay, has authority, has authority, because presumably this is going to be, of course, multicasted, and this is going to be server side, right? And this is going to be fired on all instances. If you, like, again, just imagine that there's behind something, and this is my window of opportunity because it's going to get executed everywhere. So now I say print string. I'm not sure if this is going to work though. I mean, it should work if my understanding here is correct, but I could be wrong. So here I'm going to say male, because, you know, the traditional patriarchy males have authority, and then I'm going to say female. Whatever. If you're a feminist, please do get offended because I really don't care. Now compile and play, and press C. As you can see, server and client have different results. Here, server and client have different results. Of course, if I spam it, there is significant lag. But that's because of the multicast. Now, if I go ahead and run this on the server, you'll see that, you know, how the whole thing operates. There's my server, and I'm running MPC1. And I'm simply going to press C. As you can see, it goes all the way up to the authority. So that's when you would use the has authority. Whether you're, like, only if you're running a listen server or you're multicasting, generally speaking, only then you would need to have authority. Also, make sure whenever you're passing objects around, make sure that they're valid, because it could really create problems. Like, it just is valid is a very quick, is valid. Oh God, there's too many valids. This bit. So is valid is something that takes a little bit of time, very little bit of time, but it actually allows you to verify if something is not null. I believe if you take a look here, well, the valid here, I think, is checking for null. But be aware that if you send something that does not exist, it could actually crash your server. All right, so that's something you don't want. So definitely be sure whenever you're passing values around that you're not sure that exist or they would exist. Make sure that they're valid. Okay. And yeah, that's pretty much it. The last tip I would give you is that, first of all, you would want, obviously this is getting really messy, right? You've got functions you have an event to call an event so that it can call an event, right? So this is where we're jumping into the server, from the server into everybody, right? Jump into the server goes to everyone, everybody gets fired this thing. So that's a problem. The easiest solution I think, like, I have found to this issue is just to create another event graph and call this server. And simply grab all of these guys. Well, I need to go ahead and just say server print. So I want to get this guy in here. So that's one. And then I want to go to my another server print. What is this? Do I have two server prints? Yeah, okay, whatever. So I want to grab this guy as well, cut him out, and go to my server here, paste him in. My event graph, what else do I have? The increment all, that's definitely something that has to go into the server. Boom. Great. Event graph, well, what else do we have? Tester, swap color, let's use swap color as well. Get this guy out of here. And testosterone, that's the multi. So the multicasts you could leave inside the master graph. Some people like to put them inside the server. You might want to have, like, I would probably leave it on the master graph or whatever. So rock tester here, there it is. I want to put this on the server as well, right? And you could also have client specific. So maybe I want to say, right, I want to leave my multicasts and everything that's shared between everybody to be, you know, in the master graph. But then I want another one which would be client side. So this is server side, this is client side, and I'm going to grab everything that I have for the client, which is basically all of this stuff. like the only thing that's going to be here basically is this testosterone bit. So what you would do is simply grab everything and cut it out. Oops, oops, oops. Cut it out and put it in the client bit. There we go. And obviously you could comment this out and arrange this to be much nicer and whatever. So now you have access to, you know, client. Oops. What am I missing here? Swap color on what exactly? What am I looking for? Did I just delete this? No, I didn't. What was my target? I don't know. Swap color? I don't have a swap color. Why is that? Oh, wait a second now. What did I miss? Is there a swap color here? Oh, I actually deleted the swap color. That's great. Well, obviously that's something you don't do, but whatever. Otherwise, everything is fine. I think I don't believe I deleted. Oh, it's called a raw swap color, which is called by. No, this is the victim, right? Yeah. So we need to actually use change color. Okay, I need to actually use Ross change color, and then the swap color is. Oh my God, it's my bad, guys. It's not where it's supposed to be. It should be in the server. Yeah. Maybe. Yeah, I just broke something here when I was cutting things out. You should generally have them split up this way. I'm not gonna fix this now so that it works. Well, although technically I should. I'm gonna just Control Z maybe, because I did want to show you that it will work on a listen server, but now it won't because I kind of screwed it up. So we got raw swap color. This executes on the server. We need to color something. Change color. Something like this needs to happen. And then in my victim, what do I have here? Yes, change color. This will set the color, and this will MC set color. And this is a swap color, and I need on the client to actually call Mr. Swap Color. So swap color, like this. I think should be compiling and play. Okay, it works. Now I want to do this on a. Oh, it already was. Sorry. So this is how a listen server would work, of course. Everything that works on a listen server will by default work on a dedicated server, and vice versa. Of course, as you can see, there is a little bit of lag, right? A little bit of lag, but not a lot. And of course, you can optimize this later. And again, this is just for this is just a testing environment. That's not something that you know, it's not going to be that bad if when you publish the game. One more thing, note by the way that even though I'm calling this from the client, there's still a latency, a slight lag, because it has to be called first on the server. If I call this on the server, it's a little bit fast, like a tiny bit faster. Anyway, guys, that is basically it. So armed with this knowledge, where you have your client and your server, there I'm going to close these. So my event graph basically has this. This is my master graph, everything. So what are the major takeaway points from this entire long ass video, which I hope is clear enough for you to understand the differences between ownership, etc. So let's begin just a real quick recap on how things behave. First of all, whenever you have a multiplayer game, you want to be setting it up so that it runs on a dedicated server. Reason being that for a listen server, you can get away with the switch has authority. If everything you have, if all the logic you have is split between the client and the authority with a switch, means that it's very difficult to transition to a dedicated server. And in case you desire to go to a dedicated server to have more advanced things such as leaderboards and whatnot, player saves, etc., you don't want to have to refactor that later down the line. So make sure it works for a dedicated server. Use the listen server to see what's going on in the dedicated server if it's something like animation or some kind of a position update. But other than that, make sure it runs on a dedicated server first. With that being said, Switch Has Authority also has a use for multicasts. So that's pretty much the only two times you'll be using it, either for a listen server or for multicasts. So that's why you would want to switch has authority in order to split your execution pathing. Second, whenever you start something, there's actually a copy of that on the server. So there's actually 4 pawns inside the entire game. I can prove it to you by looking at at all worlds, and you'll see that we have actually 4 player controllers because we have 4 pawns. There's 2 replicas there's a replica for each player on the server. Next on the line is ownership. Anything that is possessed by the player is owned by that player. So if you fire a run on client function, it will be ran on the client that is owning the object. Okay, it's the reverse of a run on server, meaning that it's the only way a server can fire something exclusively on an owner, right? The same way, the only way for a client to have any impact on the game would be to run something on the server. The same way for a server is to have an impact on an individual object that is owned by another player is a run on client. If you want to affect all the clients, you will use a multicast. Multicast also also fires off depending on ownership. Use this table on page 60 of Cedric's Bible to find out what gets fired when and when to use what, depending on what gets owned. Okay, ownership is not the same as something's residency. Just because the game mode and the AI controller is living inside the server, it doesn't mean that the server owns them. But generally speaking, that shouldn't really be affecting your decision making because, again, even though the server doesn't own them, it is only on the server. Nobody else can do anything to it. Therefore, ownership is irrelevant at that point. However, AI controller can possess pawns, and whenever an AI controller possesses pawns, that is the server's ownership because the server possesses and controls the AI controller possesses the pawn, and therefore the chain continues the same way it does for the players. And finally, whenever you spawn something, it has to be spawned. First of all, spawning things have to be spawned on the server. That's number one. And second of all, I'm not sure about this one, but as far as I'm aware, whenever you spawn a bullet off of a gun, the ownership of that bullet is unowned. Actually, nobody owns that bullet. Don't quote me on that. You have to Google that yourself, but I'm pretty sure nothing owns it. Anything inside the level, generally speaking, is unowned. Usually these are unowned actors, such as this one. Where'd he go? Such as this one. This is an unowned actor. Nobody actually possesses it, neither the server nor the player. And even though there's a copy of each on the player's game, on the client's game, on the server's game, on every client's game, nobody possesses it because it's unowned. The moment somebody possesses it, though, it becomes that person's owner. That means that 2 players, as far as I am aware, 2 player controllers cannot possess the same pawn. Like in real world. Like if I decided to have 20 players and they all had to possess the same pawn at the same time, it wouldn't work. Just the same way you have a capture the flag and you can only have 1 flag carrier. You can't have just 2 people holding the flag at the same time and moving it. Same thing works here. That's why if you have something like a modular control system, you would actually have, like, for example, a tank. You have a driver who would drive the tank, a shooter who would move the turret, and you would have like maybe a gunner or a turret gunner like at the top who would use the machine gun. So these are 3 players who have distinct control over the same actor. But that's when components come into play, and you have to figure out who's going to possess what. And technically speaking, they have to be 3 separate actors, as far as I am aware. But I haven't delved into that. So if you're making something that requires people to cooperate in a vehicle or in a robot or something that is controlled from multiple inputs based on multiple people's inputs, it's definitely not easy and fairly complicated. I'm not sure what would be the best approach for that. So hopefully, and fortunately, if you're smart enough, you're not doing something like that. You're just having a very simple interaction between objects and a very simple game. Obviously, your own idea, not what I'm doing. Okay, that is basically everything that you need to know about multiplayer. And with this knowledge now, start slowly but surely to test your own game for multiplayer. And if you have something that you don't understand, if something is unclear, at this point you'd be better off testing it, because I've covered most of the questions you might have. I mean, obviously there are some, of course, there's many more that you would have, but the general questions are answered here. So if you have a problem with trying to figure out, okay, well, where does this run? Wait, why doesn't this work on the server? Wait, why does this work only on the client? Why isn't this replicated across everybody? Remember, replication is replicated between the owner and the server. Okay, so that's an important thing. If something is unowned, then it's replicated across everybody. And of course, it all depends over this, not only the RPC wise, but also replication wise. Because remember, both of these pawns, both of these player pawns have their own values. Both these player controllers, both of the player pawns have their own values. But you did see that even though both of them replicated, they're not actually identical unless you run a for loop. So if you want to affect all of them, run a for loop. Replication is the act of exchanging information between the server and one client. All right, so one client, not all of them, just the one. And that is, of course, when the client owns something. When it doesn't own something, as far as I'm aware, it's reflected for everyone, because everybody will be affected and nobody will be screwed up. Okay, make sure to use your source control for this. Obviously, this is not source controlled because this is just a test example. But in your project, make sure to do your final submit, commit, change log, whatever you want to call this. Make sure you do your final submit before you start implementing any sort of multiplayer to your game, because chances are you will make a mistake, something will go wrong, you might break something, you might crash your engine, whatever it is you're doing, you might create a serious problem. So you want to have that source controlled. And I mean, you've already seen the ability of source control just saving your ass whenever something just manages to or decides to break. So that being said, I will be leaving you guys with all of that, information to process, and hopefully by the time we go into the next video, where I may do this, off the screen, just set up the multiplayer, the basic multiplayer, and then we can do the whole lobbying and the session system there, because sessions and lobbies are a little bit different. This is just the functionality. But you also need players to be able to connect to your game and to invite players to your game and to do a bunch of things basically for your game. So a session and a lobby and all that jazz, and we're going to make this work. We're also going to include the ability to connect by IP, which I think is very important, and no games do that anymore for some reason, as if everybody forgot how to connect to by IP. But I think it's important. It's a very important thing to have, especially for testing as well. Anyway, we're going to do that and create a lobby menu or whatever, and integrate it into Steam. So I'm not sure what's the format for the next video, but definitely this is as much as you need to know to make your game functional online. All right. If you have that, if by the next video you have your game working on multiple, with multiple clients on a dedicated server, you have nothing to fear. Okay. So understand that. I'll see you guys next time. Again, use this as a reference and run your own little experiments in the meantime. Okay, so bye bye.